picture this. You and your friends are on a skiing trip, way out there deep in the Ural Mountains, experienced hikers, all geared up, ready for the challenge, and then something goes wrong. Really wrong. You never make it back.
That's the tragic reality that a group of 9 hikers faced back in 1959, and it's come to be known as the Dyatlov Pass Incident.
And we're going to really dive deep into this mystery today. I mean, it's a story that has puzzled people for, well, decades.
And for good reason, right? I mean, the circumstances surrounding their deaths are so strange, so unusual.
So many contradictions.
The real head-scratcher. It's almost impossible not to get pulled into trying to figure out what happened.
Right. Exactly. Okay, so let's set the stage here. Transport ourselves back. It's January 1959 in the Soviet Union. A group of 9 hikers, led by Igor Dyatlov, they set out to cross the northern Ural Mountains.
Yeah, their goal was to reach this mountain peak, a Torten, in a really remote and unforgiving region. And like you said, these weren't just some, weekend warriors.
Right.
They were experienced hikers, very familiar with the challenges that come with winter expeditions.
Yeah.
In fact, what's really interesting is they were actually aiming for a grade 3rd certification, which at the time was like the highest level in the Soviet hiking system. So, they were really pushing their limits.
Oh, that's serious stuff.
Yeah, it meant they were taking on a route that was, well, challenging to say the least, something that required, a ton of skill and being really prepared.
And they were prepared, right? I mean, they meticulously planned everything out.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. They planned their whole route out in detail, documented all their supplies, and even got their plans approved, officially by the Sverdlovsk City Route Commission.
So everything seemed like it was in order.
Exactly. Seemed like they had everything under control.
So then they get started. How did the journey begin?
Well, the initial part of the journey went pretty much as expected. They traveled by train to Ivdel, then they hopped on a truck to Vizhai, which was the last inhabited settlement before you hit the wilderness.
Okay, so last stop for supplies and civilization.
Right. From there, they set off on skis.
Okay.
Following the Ospia River, deeper and deeper into the mountains.
And it's during this initial phase that one of the hikers, Yuri Yudin, he actually had to turn back.
Yeah, he had some health issues that were acting up.
So it was just the 9 remaining hikers who continued on.
Right. And sadly, this decision to turn back, it ended up haunting him for the rest of his life.
It's a chilling thought, right? Knowing that if he hadn't turned back.
Yeah, it's hard not to wonder what might have been different.
And I think that's part of what makes this story so gripping.
It's that what if, right?
Like it's that unknown.
What they didn't know at the time was that they were starting a journey that would become, well, one of the most enduring mysteries of the 20th century.
And as weeks went by with no word from the group, the concern back home started to grow and grow fast.
Yeah, and eventually that concern, it turned into full-blown alarm. And that's when a search and rescue operation was launched.
Volunteers, the army, the police, everyone was out there.
Combing that area, desperate for any sign of these missing hikers.
And then finally, on February 26th, they make a chilling discovery. The group's abandoned tent.
Yeah, right there on the slopes of Kolotsiakal.
And this peak, it was actually known by the indigenous Mansi people as, get this, the Mountain of the Dead.
Which is, talk about ominous, right?
Yeah, and it wasn't just a neatly packed campsite, was it? This tent was found damaged, like someone had ripped it open from the inside.
Yeah, almost as if they had to cut their way out in a real hurry.
So that detail right there, it immediately raises questions.
It just doesn't make sense, right? These were experienced hikers, like Dyatlov and his group. They wouldn't abandon their shelter for no reason, especially in those brutal winter conditions of the Ural Mountains.
Right, something must have happened, something that made them flee their tent in such a desperate way.
Absolutely. And when investigators looked inside the tent, they found all their belongings, warm clothing, food, their skis, everything.
Like they just left in a panic.
It's as if they just grabbed what they could and ran, leaving behind the very things that would have helped them survive. And leading away from the tent, there was this trail of footprints in the snow.
Footprints?
Yeah, 9 sets of footprints, and some were barefoot.
Barefoot.
Some in socks, some were even wearing just a single shoe.
Wow.
It's a picture of chaos, pure chaos, a desperate flight into the freezing night.
And these footprints, they were a key piece of the puzzle.
Oh, absolutely. They showed that the group had left their tent on foot, seemingly on their own, which kind of dispelled those early theories of maybe an attack by wild animals or, the Mansi people.
So it was them leaving on their own. And where did these footprints lead?
Well, they led down towards a wooded area about 1.5 kilometers from the tent,
Yep.
which suggests they might have tried to find shelter among the trees.
Maybe trying to build a fire, get warm.
Right, trying to survive. And so the search continued, but as they found more bodies, the case just got more and more complex.
More complex and way more unsettling.
So the first 2 bodies they found, Krivonyshenko and Doroshenko, they were near the edge of the woods by a cedar tree.
A cedar tree?
And get this, they were only in their underwear.
Wow.
Like they had been trying to build a fire, last-ditch effort to stay warm in those freezing temperatures.
I can't even imagine being out there like that in the middle of the night, forced to flee your shelter with barely any clothes on.
It's a chilling thought.
It really makes you wonder what could have driven them to that point.
No kidding. I mean, the autopsy reports, they confirmed that hypothermia was the cause of death for these 2.
Okay.
But as the search went on and they found more bodies, the picture, well, it just got more complex, more unsettling.
Right, because 3 more bodies were found between that cedar tree and the tent.
Yeah, Dyatlov, Kolmogorova, and Slobodin.
And their positions, it kind of looked like they were trying to get back to the tent.
Yeah, like they realized how dangerous their situation was, out in the open like that.
Right. Maybe they tried to get some more clothes.
It's possible. I mean, their clothing was a bit better than the first 2, suggesting they might have managed to grab something from the tent before the cold got to them.
But ultimately, they still succumbed to the cold.
Yeah, hypothermia, again, according to the autopsies.
Okay, but then things take a really strange turn, right? Because 2 months later, they find the remaining 4 hikers.
Yeah, and this is where it gets really weird.
They were found in a ravine deeper into those woods, buried under 4 meters of snow.
4 meters? That's a lot of snow.
I mean, that just means they were there for a long time, maybe even since, right after that initial incident.
It really makes you question how thorough that initial search was.
Yeah, like how could they have missed them?
Exactly. And the condition of their bodies, the injuries, well, that's where things get really disturbing.
These weren't just people who died from the cold.
Right. These hikers had some seriously severe injuries.
Like catastrophic injuries.
Yeah, I mean, Thibaut Brignol, she had a massive skull fracture.
A skull fracture.
And Dubinina and Zolotoryov, they both had extensive chest fractures, ribs broken in multiple places.
Wow, what kind of force could do that?
It would have to be a huge amount of force. Investigators said it was like being in a car crash.
But here's the thing. There were no external wounds.
That's what's so bizarre. No major cuts or bruises, the kind of things you'd expect with those kinds of impacts.
So it's like the force that caused these injuries, it was somehow internal, like it didn't come from the outside.
Yeah, and then there's Dubinina. Remember, she not only had those internal injuries,
right,
but she was also missing her tongue, her eyes, and part of her lips.
That's really strange.
It is. The medical examiner back then, Dr. Boris Vozrojdeny, he said it was probably just decomposition and maybe animals, scavenging, given that they were found in a stream.
Okay.
But a lot of researchers, they don't buy that explanation.
Really?
Yeah, they say that those specific tissues missing, it's not typical for scavenging animals, and the amount of tissue loss, it just doesn't line up with normal decomposition.
So we have these 9 hikers, some dying from the cold, others with these bizarre injuries, and a scene that points to a panicked escape from their tent in the dead of night.
Yeah, it's a lot to take in.
No wonder this case has sparked so much speculation over the years. I mean, everyone has a theory.
Exactly. But the original Soviet investigation back in 1959, they concluded that it was a compelling natural force that caused the deaths.
A compelling natural force. That's pretty vague.
It is. It's super vague, and a lot of people weren't satisfied with that explanation.
Right, and it did nothing to stop all those theories popping up trying to explain what happened.
Oh yeah, it just fueled the fire.
All right, so let's dig into some of those theories to try to separate fact from fiction here and see if we can make sense of this mystery. Okay, so let's start with the most common theory, the one that the Soviet investigators initially went with, which is that the hikers were caught in an avalanche.
Yeah, at first glance, it kind of makes sense, right? You've got a sudden rush of snow that could explain why they ran out of the tent like that, and the force of an avalanche, well, that could definitely account for some of those injuries.
And there's a problem with that theory, right?
The terrain where they actually camped, it wasn't really known for avalanches.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the slope was pretty gentle, and there weren't any signs of like a huge buildup of snow, which you'd usually see before a big avalanche.
But there's been some newer research about a different kind of avalanche, right?
Yeah, there's this rarer type called a slab avalanche, and those can happen even on slopes that aren't that steep.
Oh, I see.
Basically, what happens is a whole layer of snow, it just breaks off and slides down.
Interesting. So could that have happened here?
Well, a study in 2021, it suggested that maybe a slab avalanche, even a small one, could have hit the tent, causing the damage and maybe even some of the injuries.
So that would explain why they ran out.
Right. But even if we say, okay, maybe there was a slab avalanche, there are still some things that don't quite add up.
Like what?
Well, could a slab avalanche really cause injuries that bad, like the crushed skull and all those broken ribs?
That's a good point.
It just seems like those injuries, they need more of a focused impact, like a really hard hit, not just a general slight of snow.
And of course, there's still the whole mystery of Dubinina's missing tongue and the other tissues.
Yeah, that's still a big question mark. The avalanche theory doesn't really address that at all.
Right. So then what other explanations are out there?
Well, the fact that this happened near a secret Soviet military base, that's led to a lot of speculation about, some kind of covert military operation.
Like what if the hikers stumbled upon some sort of weapons test?
Exactly. Maybe something involving explosives or even radioactive material.
And there were those reports of strange lights, right?
Right. People saw weird lights in the sky around the time of the incident, and then some of the hikers' clothes, they had traces of radiation on them.
Okay. That's pretty strange. But was there any actual proof that the military was doing anything in that area at that time?
Unfortunately, no. There's no hard evidence. And the radiation levels, they weren't high enough to kill anyone.
So it's possible, but we're still missing some pieces of the puzzle.
Definitely.
And then, of course, we have to talk about the more, shall we say, unconventional theories.
You mean the UFOs and the yeti?
Yeah, I mean, those have become almost inseparable from the Dyatlov Pass story.
Right. People have said they saw these orange orbs in the sky, and some think that means UFOs. And then with the missing tongue and the other strange injuries, some people have even suggested a yeti encounter.
I mean, it's a remote area. Who knows what's out there? It really plays into that idea of the unknown, those forces we can't explain.
Yeah, I get it. Those theories are definitely intriguing, but they mostly rely on, speculation and stories.
Right, there's no actual physical evidence to back them up.
Exactly.
So here we are with all these different theories, and each one has its strengths and weaknesses.
The avalanche, it might explain some things, but not all of the injuries. The military theory, it's interesting, but where's the proof? And then the paranormal theories, well, they're fun to think about, but there's just no real basis for them.
It's frustrating, isn't it?
Yeah, it's like a puzzle where some of the pieces are just missing. And even though the Russians reopened the case in 2019 and they still say it was most likely an avalanche, a lot of people still aren't convinced.
Well, it definitely makes you think, doesn't it? About all the things we don't know and maybe can't explain.
It really does. It's a good reminder that some mysteries might just stay mysteries.
And for me, it's the human side of this story that really gets to me. These were 9 young people who loved adventure, and they just went out there into the wilderness, and it ended in tragedy.
That's true. Regardless of what actually happened, it's a story that reminds us just how powerful nature can be and how unpredictable.
And it makes you think, what if it wasn't just an avalanche? I mean, how do you explain those injuries? The missing tongue, the broken bones with no marks, all their stuff scattered around, and that desperate run from the tent. It's all just so unsettling.
It really is. You just can't shake that feeling that something else is going on.
Well, maybe someday new evidence will come out and it will finally give us some answers.
I hope so.
But until then, the Dyatlov Pass Incident is going to keep sparking debates, inspiring investigations, and reminding us that sometimes the most captivating mysteries are the ones that we can't solve.